Hello and welcome to our first Euranet 2023 summit. My name is Beatriz Rios and I will be your host today. And I have with me to ask questions in the debate the journalists from our network, the Euranet Plus network, from all over Europe. So I'd like to welcome virtually to our studio Silvia from Bulgarian National Radio, Danielle from Radio 100.7 in Luxembourg, Michał from Polski Radio in Poland, Jone from Genius Radijas in Lithuania, and Roman from Euradio in France. Hello, everyone. The last few months have been marked by the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which has led to a significant change in the EU's defense and foreign affairs policy. That's why I am delighted to welcome today the Vice President and High Representative Josep Borrell for this interview. In a few seconds, I will bring my colleagues in, but my first question is about the latest news. Yesterday, you had a second session, of dialogue with Serbia and Kosovo. The tensions are at an all-time high. We don't seem to see much progress here. What is your feeling? Are we going to be able to de-escalate this situation? And are we ever going to see a signature of the normalization agreement?
Yes. Yesterday we had another meeting on crisis mode, and we tried to diffuse the tensions in order to try to look for a way forward. And the good news is that both leaders understand the severity of the current situation and the need for new elections. And this is something important. They agreed that new elections has to take place. In the meantime, we have to diffuse tensions. We discussed about the recent arrest. I think Serbia needs to release the 3 Kosovo policemen held in Serbia, immediately, unconditionally, and the allegations of mistreatment or the recent arrest of Kosovo Serbs need to be investigated, and if there is no cases against them, they have also to be released. Both parts have to contribute to de-escalation in order to hold new elections.
How do you see the process of getting to that normalization agreement between the both countries?
No, we cannot talk about normalization agreement if there is no normalization on the ground. How can I talk about the normalization of the relations when people are fighting in the street? And majors are in places where they are being sieged by demonstrators, violent demonstrators, and engaging with United Nations forces. First thing first, we have to go back to normal in everyday life. And for that, I was saying, we need new elections. Let's see how do we implement them. And in the meantime, de-escalation, release of prisoners, look at the mistreatment. If has done some cases, stop arresting people, and look for again conversation.
Let's stabilize the situation in the country, and then we'll see. I would like to bring now my colleague Silvia from Sofia, who is joining us live. Please, Silvia, do you have the floor?
Hello, Beatrice and Mr. Borrell. My name is Silvia Petrova, and I'm a journalist at Bulgarian National Radio. My question for you is, what is going to be the EU's next steps if North Macedonia doesn't amend its constitution to acknowledge the existence of an ethnic Bulgarian minority by November? Because Bulgaria is seeing such amendments as a condition for lifting the veto than after the diplomatic formula proposed by the EU so far. Thank you.
I'll repeat the question because we're having some issues with the sound. My colleague Silvia was asking about the next step between North Macedonia and Bulgaria to try to get an agreement to unlock the process of accession for North Macedonia. What is your vision on this issue?
Well, North Macedonia is making good progress. And there is nothing from the European side that would block the North Macedonia accession to the European Union. And this accession will be strictly abide by the European principles and European standards. Certainly for that we need good cooperation, and regional cooperation remain an essential element, as well as the stabilization and association process to be implemented. But bilateral issues should not be conditioning and will not condition the accession process.
Indeed. Silvia, would you have a follow-up?
Actually, yes. About the tension between Kosovo and Serbia, both EU and the US had spoken out against the municipal elections in Kosovo in April, and considering Washington is traditionally a strong advocate for Kosovo, why is that? Could that be a way to win Serbia over to EU's side? As we know, Belgrade has not imposed sanctions on Russia. Thank you.
Well, don't mix things. The fact that Belgrade has not imposed sanctions to Russia doesn't change anything on the settlement of the normalization. We talk about the relationship between Kosovo and Serbia. And at that moment, the US and the European Union are strongly united on asking Kosovo to decrease tensions and to call for new elections. What has happened should personally have been avoided. It has been provocation, followed by reactions, and this has to be solved among them, no matter the relation between Serbia and Russia and Kosovo with the US. These are not part of the discussions.
So you don't make any link between the relationship that the EU has with
What's happening in
Serbia?
Kosovo, what's happening in this town hall, what's happening with the violence against NATO troops, what's happening with people being arrested, with repeating elections, has nothing to do with the relationship that one may have with Russia and other with the US. Don't mix things.
And how is it going with Serbia, Joe? Are we able to convince them to join us in imposing the sanctions against Russia, or is it still a no-go?
Look, we cannot impose to third countries their foreign policy. We want the candidate countries to align with our foreign policy, and it's clear that the Serbian foreign policy is not very well aligned with our foreign policy, just in case of Russia. But one has to understand the specific circumstances of each country.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. We're going to go to Poland now, where our colleague Michał is joining us live. Please, Michał, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Good morning. This is Michał Strzałkowski from Polskie Radio from Warsaw. My question regards Ukraine, because the ongoing war and the situation in Ukraine is very, very important. And I think I'm not exaggerating for everybody in Poland. And I would like to ask, could the possible success of the Ukrainian offensive in the south of the country accelerate the process of Ukraine's further rapprochement with the European Union?
Once again, don't mix things. The war is the war, and the adhesion process is the adhesion process. Certainly, the fact that Russia aggressed Ukraine has accelerated the process of Ukraine approaching the European Union, being granted membership in a record time. And we are working hard, and I personally, as High Representative for all foreign policy, including adhesion, take very much care of our promises of adhesion be taken seriously. And in October, the Commission will present a statement of the progress done by Ukraine. I repeat that the adhesion process is a merit-based, it's not a free lunch, it's not a present, it's not something that is being granted, it's something that is being won. And Ukraine has to do the necessary reforms, and they are doing at a very quick rate. They are doing things quickly, and the Ukrainian population, the Ukrainian people are feeling more than ever the will of becoming member of the European Union. That's a fact. Maybe the most important fact. The political will, not of the government, of the people. And this has to push for the adhesion process, which will be also an accelerator of the adhesion process for the Balkan countries.
Indeed. Do you have a follow-up questions, Michał?
Yes, so if I may ask, what I'm understanding is that any peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, or any truce between them, has nothing in common with the accession process of Ukraine. So this is possible that Ukraine will start the negotiating talks before there's any truce or any peace agreement with Russia.
You know, I don't have a crystal ball to tell you how the military operation will be in the ground, how long the war will last. The only thing that I can say is that we are taking very seriously and accelerating as much as we can the work needed for Ukraine to become a member of the European Union, which has a certain process, and at the same time to continue supporting Ukraine military to defend against the aggression and to recover the territories that Russia has occupied. We are playing in two different stages.
Going back to the question of the counteroffensive, President Macron said a couple of weeks ago that it was important for Ukraine to manage to achieve this counteroffensive because that would put the country in a better position to negotiate a peace agreement. Do you agree with this, and where are the diplomatic efforts going in parallel with the fight of the Ukrainian army in the front?
Well, what you say, it's obvious. If you are in a better position in the battlefield, you are in a better position in the negotiations. That's why the battlefield continues raging, because everybody understands that in order to go to a negotiation, you need to be in a strong position in the battlefield. And unhappily, Russia doesn't want to stop this war. So Ukraine has to continue defending. And the fact that the war will be maybe lasting depends. It depends on facts that nobody controls. From our side, we have to support Ukraine on fighting for their survival. Russia doesn't want to stop the war, and Ukraine cannot stop. One thing is to want, and another thing is to can.
On the diplomatic efforts, we see that a lot of countries have pushed their own peace agreement settlement on the table. How do you evaluate these different approaches to peace, and how do you see moving forward the possibility of, in parallel to the fight in the battleground, trying to push for diplomatic efforts to end the war?
Diplomatic efforts are always welcome. I am coming from Egypt, and I was talking with the Egyptian minister who was coming from Moscow. I think it was the first talk with one of the African Union mission to Kiev and Moscow. And they came with a, not very optimistic approach. And yes, there is a proliferation of proposals, comments from Latin America, from Africa, from Indonesia. I was in Singapore also listening to the Indonesian minister. But, it's more a way of talking about the fight between Russia and the West than talking about the fact that one country has been invaded by the neighbor. And sometimes I have the feelings that some of these initiatives are more trying to be present in the geopolitical stage that really presenting proposals that could be acceptable.
Rather than addressing what is actually happening in Ukraine.
Everybody wants to be part of the settlement. Everybody wants to be present. And remember that there are many countries in the world, emerging countries. Some of them are in the so-called Global South, the BRICS, that wants to play a play and wants to their voice to be heard. And that's why there is this proliferation of initiatives that I'm sure all of them are pushed by goodwill. But the important thing in order for this initiative to be positive and to be fruitful is to make a clear difference between the aggressor and the aggressed, between the invader and the invaded. You cannot talk about the war putting on equal foot Russia and Ukraine. If you do that, you're going to go nowhere.
You were mentioning the countries in the Global South and these different blocs that we see emerging in the context of the war that is somehow accelerating the change in the world. How do you see these countries playing out? And as you said, it's just a matter of being engaged in this process, or do they have a long-term approach to the way they are going to be placed in the global world?
Well, the world is being organized on a strong bipolar world, bipolarity. But apart from that, additionally to that, there are a multipolarity. It's not just two poles. There are many poles It's a kind of multipolarity that makes countries that 20 years ago couldn't have the importance they have today to be present as actors on the world stage. And we have to accept this reality. We are going to be in a complex multidimensionality based on a multipolarity. And these poles are hedging states that for some reasons, at some moment, they will be leaning more on one side, and for other reasons, at another moments, on the other side. And we have to be able to manage this complex reality. The world cannot be resumed on the confrontation between the US and China or the war in Ukraine. They are part of a much more complex reality because the political landscape today is a completely different one than the one that came out of the World War, and much more the one that came out of the Cold War.
We will talk a little bit more about that and about the role of the EU, but I want to go to Vilnius now, where our colleague Jonė is joining us. Please, you have the floor, Jonė.
Thank you, Jonė Sligaitė from Lithuania. Good day to everyone and to you, sir. My question is, if NATO does not offer Ukraine precise security commitments during the Vilnius summit, would the rejection of future consideration on this issue be more likely if Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump were to emerge victorious in the US elections? Furthermore, what level of influence would member states of the EU have in the future, especially with a new US Republican president, in pushing for Ukraine's NATO membership? Thank you.
Yes, certainly things could be different. They could have been different if in Washington they had been a different president. I'm sure everybody knows that the attitude, the proposals, the mood of President Trump would have been different than President Biden administration. And I'm sure that one of the things that Putin keeps in mind is that it will be next elections, and then in these next elections they can face a different American administration. And maybe Putin is also waiting for the European societies to get tired of the war and the effort that this war represents for us. But I think that on that Putin has made the big mistake. The big mistake was to believe that Russia was stronger, that Ukraine was weaker, and the Europeans were disunited, and the transatlantic relationship was also weak. And by the contrary, the transatlantic relation has grown up, it's stronger than ever. NATO is stronger than ever. Two new members, important states like Finland and Sweden, wants to be members. So Putin is getting just the contrary that he wanted. He didn't want to be encircled by NATO, and the result he's getting is that Sweden and Finland, now they are members of NATO. I don't know what's going to happen in Vilnius. They will not be there. I am European Union, not NATO. But certainly any outcome of the war has to be based on giving to Ukraine serious and reliable security guarantees.
I'm going to go back to Vilnius. Jonė, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, if NATO fails to suggest this membership to Ukraine in I don't know, in 5 years, for example, is the EU ready to fill that economic and military gap for Ukraine?
Well, the best guarantee that we, European Union, can give to Ukraine is membership. There is something that are in my realm and others that are not in my realm. And what I can do as Vice President of the Commission, also in charge of the enlargement process at my level, is to try to accelerate the adhesion process. The better guarantee that the European Union can give to Ukraine is a clear European perspective of being a member of the European Union. I know the European Union is not a military alliance, but being a member of the European Union gives a strong security guarantee because you are part of a bloc, which is linked with solidarity ties.
Let me follow up on that, because indeed one of the biggest achievements that we have seen over the past few weeks is how the member states have gone into a further integration on defense, and how we have seen taboos like we've never seen before, buying weapons together, supporting militarily a third country. One of the things that Ukraine asks if it's not able to join NATO anytime soon is security guarantees. What can be the role of the EU in this?
Once again, don't confuse things. The European Union is the European Union. Most of the European Union member states are members of NATO, but the European Union is not a member of NATO, even if I am invited to participate in the ministerial meetings of NATO. That's true, we are not a military alliance, but we have made an incredible effort to supply arms to Ukraine. Nobody could have imagined that from the beginning, and I am very proud of having been an active part of this process, we put together our capacities, the stockpiles of our armies, providing arms to Ukraine. Without this, Ukraine could have not defended themselves. So yes, the taboo has been broken. We don't provide arms to a country at war. Yes, we provide arms to a country at war, because this country is being invaded, it's in our neighborhood, and their fight is also part of our fight. So this is something for the European Union to take stock of, and to understand that in this challenging world, we need to have something more than that trade capacity and the defense of the rule of law, which has been the trademark of the European Union. We need to also speak what I said at the beginning of my mandate, the language of power, which is not only military power, but it is also military power.
One last follow-up before we move to our French-speaking part. You've mentioned before that one of the things that Putin might be counting on is people in European countries getting tired of the war. 500 days in, we see that in some countries. Do you fear that that could affect European unity moving forward on sanctions, on military support to Ukraine?
No, I don't see it. And I don't see it through the polls, the statistical analysis that we may have. It's not my feeling. It's the statistical and scientific base who allows me to say that Europeans massively continue supporting Ukraine. Well, there are differences, and certainly in the Baltic countries it's maybe bigger than in others. I don't want to mention them, but it's clear that there are differences. But in average, the strong continues being very high. And when I talk with my colleagues at the Foreign Affairs Council, at the Defense Council, my colleagues, the Ministers of Defense, the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, it's clear that there is a strong commitment on the support to Ukraine.
Thank you so much for your participation. We're now moving into our Spanish-speaking part.